semester. And we're going to be recording tonight's presentation. You should see that prompt come up on your screen. My name is Megan Arney, and I'm a third-year PhD student in education at Washington University in St. Louis. And I'm really thrilled to be facilitating today's Motivation Monday. Just give me 1 second to get the slides to progress. Should be going. There we go. Okay. So Motivation Monday is hosted by the Graduate Student Committee of AERA's Motivation in Education SIG. We offer this programming as a way to disseminate and share ideas and strategies for conducting educational research. This year, we are continuing our Motivation Monday format from last year by hosting a panel of scholars and practitioners in our field to discuss important topics. Our wonderful graduate student leaders have organized a series of live panels and discussions each month, so make sure to keep coming back. Here's my bio. And so before we begin, we'd just like to acknowledge that January includes many holidays, such as Martin Luther King Jr. Day, which commemorates the life of the civil rights leader and activist. The GSC recognizes, appreciates, and applauds all of the individuals from many walks of life who have contributed and continue to contribute to educational research. And now I will introduce our panelists. Our first panelist, Dr. Zhang, is a data scientist at ETS, Educational Testing Service. She specializes in building data pipelines using advanced analytics and machine learning techniques to enhance the effectiveness of educational products. Our next panelist is Dr. Baker, who is an Associate Director for Research and Evaluation at the MIT Teaching and Learning Lab. In her current role, she conducts research and evaluation studies in partnership with faculty and staff across the institute, with the goal of fostering high-quality teaching and learning experiences for MIT students. Prior to joining MIT in 2021, she was an assistant professor of educational psychology and the learning sciences at Iowa State University, where she conducted research on the social psychological factors that drive students' motivation and engagement in college classes. Her work is guided by an equity lens, often focusing on the ways in which learning contexts facilitate or hinder the engagement of students with diverse identities and backgrounds. Her research has been published in Contemporary Educational Psychology, the Journal of Educational Psychology, and the Journal of College Student Development. Our next panelist is Dr. Hetty, PhD, an Associate Professor of Educational Psychology in the Janine Rainbolt College of Education at the University of Oklahoma, where he is the Director of the Motivation, Out-of-School Value, and Engagement, MOVE, Research Lab. His research focuses on cognitive and motivational aspects of learning, including engagement, academic emotions, interest development, and learning activities that occur in everyday experience. He also studies the mechanisms of conceptual, emotional, and attitudinal change. His research has been published in Educational Psychologist, the Journal of Engineering Education, Science Education, and Psychology Today. Dr. Hetty currently serves as the president of the Scholarly Consortium for Innovative Psychology in Education. And our final panelist is Dr. Snyder, a senior curriculum manager at the Aspen Institute College Excellence Program, where she develops curriculum for transformational reform and leadership initiatives for community college leaders, including Unlocking Opportunity and the Aspen President's Fellowship. Prior to joining the Aspen Institute, she achieved tenure and promotion at the University of Louisville and then served on the faculty at 2 small liberal arts colleges. In her research program, she has focused primarily on understanding the role of student motivation beliefs in the development of academic underachievement, particularly among academically gifted students. Kate earned her MA and PhD in developmental psychology from Duke University and her BA in psychology from Northern Carolina State University. So thank you again to all of our panelists for agreeing to share their wealth of knowledge with us today. We are going to get started, so I will stop sharing my screen, and then we can just kind of talk through some of the questions that we have for you all. So our first question is just a general introductory sort of question. We would like to know what your current job title is, and if you could just share a little bit about your journey to your current position, And you can kind of just share it in whatever order you'd like.
Well, I can go first if we want to do alphabetical order, by first or last name. Amanda Baker, I already, I think listed a lot of this information in my bio. So I think just to hit the highlights again, my title now is Associate Director of Research and Evaluation in the MIT Teaching and Learning Lab, which is effectively like the teaching center at MIT, although we have a research and evaluation arm, and that's kind of where I reside. And then my journey to this current position. So I was a faculty member prior to this at Iowa State University. Prior to that, actually, while I was doing my PhD, I also had a full-time position as a research associate in what was called the Center for the Study of Student Life, which is essentially a research assessment and evaluation arm of the Office of Student Life at Ohio State, which is student affairs. And so the work that I did there kind of was, it was research and evaluation, but it was very administrative in nature. And I really enjoyed that work. I also enjoy being a faculty member, and the role I have now kind of blends a lot of both of those positions. So I have some of the autonomy that I had as a faculty member to choose what types of projects to do or where to prioritize my time, but I also get to do work that has sort of immediate real impact on how people practice education at a particular institution, which is one of the nice parts about doing administrative research. So I can explain that a little bit more, but I would say that my journey was one of, while I was doing my PhD, I kind of got this applied work experience, enjoyed working as a faculty member for a number of years, but then decided to kind of shift back over to the applied research realm. And that is where I reside now. Should I call in somebody? Should I say Ben? Ben? Alphabetical order?
Exactly. I was just going to jump in with alphabetical order. Hi, everybody. My name is Ben Heddy. I'm an associate professor of Ed Psych at the University of Oklahoma and an associate dean for research and graduate education there too. And how I came to this, I did my undergrad in psychology, did not want to go into education or Ed Psych, but started working in residential treatment centers for kids with severe behavioral disorders and fell in love with that work and started working on a master's degree in ed psych because I thought the motivation and learning component was super relevant to my work as a psychosocial rehabilitation specialist and classroom teacher. I did that for 2 years, got my master's degree. First 2 years of my PhD, I kept doing that. And then I quit that to work on my PhD full time for my last 3 years of my program. And then I was hired at OU and have been here 10 years. And I've just started in administration and I'm actually loving it. So it's a cool gig. So thanks. I think the next person would be Kate Snyder.
Thanks, Ben. So I am a senior curriculum manager, and if you're wondering what is a senior curriculum manager, that is a good question. So one of the things you'll notice when you apply to non-academic jobs or jobs in industry is they don't have a lot of clarity around titles. So there's a whole bunch of different terms for things that exist. But basically what I do is I am kind of an instructional designer in executive education. So Ben mentioned that he works in college leadership. What we do here at Aspen CEP is we work directly with college leaders to enact change on a really big scale. So prior to my work at CEP, I did have the traditional professor life and I really enjoyed it. But life happens and takes you in weird directions. One of my favorite principles from back when I did developmental psych research was equifinality, that there can be many paths to any given outcome. So there can be many paths to finding joy and happiness in a career. So I loved being a professor, but I also love what I do now. And so I think I'm passing it to Dr. Zhang.
Thanks, Kate. Sorry, my camera like broke recently, so I have to have my camera off. My name's Qian, and I'm currently a data scientist at Educational Testing Service, and we have this department called Product Innovation and Development. It is a very new department founded like 3 years ago at ETS. So the goal of our department is to make innovative educational products that can help students learn better or help language learners learn better. How did I get to this position? It's kind of like interesting story because I was majored in educational psychology, and I was specialized in applied cognition and development. But I was also very, very interested in all kinds of statistics methods when I did my research. I just want to understand all those methods so I can, do robust research. So with that in mind, I applied for like a statistics degree, minor degree, like a master degree at UGA. And I finished this degree, and they got this part-time position. It's like a statistic consulting center at UGA. So you will be able to have all kinds of opportunities to help researchers and also industry practitioners to analyze their data, to give them some suggestions, advice, guidance on how they can better understand their data. Also, at that same time, I was doing a fellowship, like a summer fellowship at University of Delaware, where I had an opportunity to work on big data from a very cool math online educational games. So which is called ST Math, and we even published a paper using like learning analytics with that data. With all that said, I was pretty sure that I wanted to do like learning analytics using my statistics knowledge and my interest in like in general machine learning models and everything. So that's how I like get into apply for a lot of jobs in industry, educational technology related or educational products related, and specifically like a data scientist role. Thank you.
Thank you all for sharing a bit about your backgrounds and the work that you're currently doing. Our next question would be jumping back to when you started applying for your various positions. So we'd just like to know, when did you start applying for these positions, and how did that fit within maybe your timeline for getting through graduate school? Just want to learn a little more about that. We can go, I think, in the same order again, if that works for everyone.
Okay. So in terms of when I started applying for positions, it depends on the position that you're referring to. So my current position, I applied in the summer and was offered a job in the summer and basically started it right away. So that's not uncommon in non-tenure track jobs that they may want you to start immediately. I will say that in my current position, we've hired other people who were say locked into teaching for a semester, and we were willing to like delay a hire for a semester or more to make sure that they could complete their contractual obligations. That's really common also in positions that hire people who may have previously been faculty members or instructors or in a role similar to that. So that timeline can be flexible, but generally people are looking for you to start sooner rather than later. And then in terms of the faculty role at Iowa State, that was the one that I did just after graduating. And so that was the timeline I think that you typically hear about, where I was applying for faculty roles in the fall. My experience is a little bit different because I was working full time and also on the faculty market and also dissertating all at the same time, which is great. But yeah, so I was very particular about which roles I applied for because I was just applying to see if anything seemed like a good fit. But yeah, I applied for a handful of faculty roles in the fall, and I think did a video interview in like late fall, like November. This was a while ago. And then came to a campus interview in like January, and was offered the position shortly thereafter. And then realized that meant I really truly did need to finish my dissertation at that point. So then I had to do that quickly. So yeah, I would say that that's sort of the timeline that you typically hear about if somebody's going into a faculty position, sort of application in the fall, and then interviews sometime late fall, early spring. And that was my experience. But both of my non faculty positions have been like a summer, early fall interview, and then an offer after that that they wanted me to ideally start as soon as I could.
Yeah, so I can add a little bit to that. I wasn't very selective. I applied to like literally every job that in any way fit my interest or area, and a whole bunch that didn't. So I ended up, I think, when I was on the job market for the first time, I applied to over 50 jobs within the US. I also applied to a bunch in Australia and New Zealand, and a couple other places. Those ones, the seasons are flipped. So when you apply to other positions around the world, you'll have to account for fall is during spring. And so their job calls are going to come out at a slightly different time. But yeah, I applied those 50 jobs, right? Anywhere between July through February, and was doing interviews and whatnot throughout that whole time as well.
So to add to applying for industry jobs, that perspective, because my academic perspective was pretty similar to Amanda's, I actually applied for my current role a year ago in January, went through several rounds of screening. I had a take-home performance task where they asked me to set aside 4 hours to work on something. They actually paid me for that, which was the first time I've actually been paid as part of a job interview. So that was really cool. And then went through a few more rounds and then finally got the offer. And like Amanda mentioned, I was like wrapping up the current semester. And so they were willing to work with me a little bit. They actually flew me out to 2 different events so that I could kind of like hit the ground running. Before I even started, I was put up in these fancy hotels and got to do some of their programming. And then we worked out a timeline where I started in the middle of the summer. So for people or organizations that hire people who are in academia, they're kind of used to working around that timeline.
Well, for me, I wasn't, so I graduated in 2022 May, but I was not decisive where I want to land in terms of academia or non-academia until 2022 January. So basically, I started applying for jobs at the end of 2021, like around December. And at that time, I was still struggling with go to academia or non-academia. So I applied for both industry jobs and postdocs. So I wasn't aiming for any faculty position at that time, just because I feel I was not well prepared. So if I was going to go to academia, I still prefer to do at least 1 extra year postdoc. So that's why I only apply for postdocs and industry jobs. I think it didn't influence or had any impact on my schedule in terms of doing my dissertation and everything, because, well, I actually, because of the pandemic, so my experiment has to switch from in-person to online. So that actually gave me extra time to work on my dissertation and stuff. So that's not a big influence on me. Timeline wise, I think it's really different between industry jobs and academia jobs. For postdoc, I remember that there's really no timeline guidelines for any postdoc positions. I remember my advisor told me you just need to keep, refreshing the web browsers of any job subscriptions and see if any job posted there, like postdoc positions posted there. and also reach out to some professors that you know, that you had networked with before, or you just really wanted to work with them. Just reach out initiatively to ask if you have any positions available. But industry-wise, I also didn't see a pattern or anything in industry that you can follow a timeline to apply for a job. I think industry is much more flexible in terms of timelines. Yeah.
Well, thank you all for sharing about your experiences so transparently when it came to, kind of making some determinations and planning those applications. Our next question would be, what aspects of the job market were expected or unexpected, and how did you prepare for these?
Want me to jump in first? Switch the order up a little bit. So a couple unexpected things. Travel was a lot more challenging than I thought it was going to be. I just had my first kid. And it's hard to set up the times to travel, but it's also sometimes they don't pay. In academia, especially, they don't pay for you to travel. And so I had to get a credit card and put the travel on the credit card with the promise that it would be reimbursed for a couple of my interviews. And they were eventually reimbursed, but that was a surprise. So something that you could plan for. And then another unexpected thing was, what do you do when you have when you have an offer and you are interviewing for another job that you really want? It's a really hard position to be in because both are really good jobs. Do you turn down the one that you want less to wait for the one that you want more? A lot of times they only give you a certain amount of time to make a decision. So I ended up doing just that, and it was really stressful and gave me panic attacks, but it all ended up working out. But come up with a game plan for what that'll look like and what your priorities are, and where you're willing to move and work and whatnot.
One of the things that I did not expect, and in the theme of being transparent, was how absolutely stupid I could be in my first interview. I was almost incoherent. It was one of those things where I drove at my first industry interview. I drove home after the interview in silence with the radio off and just contemplated how dumb I sounded throughout the entire thing. I highly recommend doing all the interviews you can, and I just considered it getting the stupid out. They asked me the first question, they were like, so tell us about yourself, and my brain literally exploded, and nothing came out because I was so used to talking about myself as an academic, as a researcher. Here's my program of research, here's my teaching philosophy. And you could just see the pain on my interviewers' faces watching. They were like, I thought she was smart, what happened? So I just got all the stupid out. And then I literally practiced. The hardest question I think in industry is, tell us about yourself, because we're so used to, as academics, talking about ourselves in a very specific way. I wrote myself a script and I put it on a Post-it and I put it on my laptop where I could literally read it, of I am a developmental psychologist and educational psychologist. And what that means is that I take the science of education. I literally bulleted out. So I was completely unprepared for how hard it would be to interview for positions that were not what I had been trained for my entire academic life. So I literally made my husband listen to me, explain, tell me about yourself, because it's so hard. And I was so dumb. But I got the stupid out and I had much better interviews after that.
I can go next.
Okay.
Oh, sorry. Oh, okay. For me, the expected part is tons of rejections. And even sometimes you just didn't hear back at all. That's the most frustrating yet expected results when you try to apply for a job. like at the end of the applying process, I was even grateful for any company just give me a reject letter. So that's expected. Unexpected is this is kind of funny that I didn't know this at all until I started applying for some postdoc positions in academia. It turned out some of the openings posted out there, it's a fake, like quote fake post, because I remember clearly there's this one, like I really want that postdoc position. It's like my interest there, and it's a professor I really wanted to work with, and I keep refreshing their job bulletin or something, and one night I found, oh my god, there's like sudden pop-up job posting, and I applied for it immediately. I believe it's like 5 seconds after the job was posted. And then next day, I got email back from this professor saying, hey, sorry, this is a fake posting for our internal, like a postdoc internal position. So we already got our candidate and blah, blah. That was unexpected and kind of like frustrating. But be prepared. Like later, I heard some of my friends told me, yeah, that's kind of common in academia. You will encounter some fake job posting. Yep.
I will say that the one thing that was a little maybe surprising to me, or that I think is just worth knowing about the job market, and this is my experience both for faculty and non-faculty positions, is that it is really hard to know if something is going to be a good fit, right? There's just only so much information. And I've been on the other end of the table for both faculty and non-faculty positions, hiring people. There's only so much information that can go into a job listing. You try to be as thoughtful as you can. Some people try to be as thoughtful as they can when they write their job listings. Some people do not. You will see this when you read job listings. But it's just really hard to know. You know, the faculty position I was in was like a weirdly good fit for some very specific reasons that I would not have predicted at all when I looked at the job posting. I remember I almost didn't apply for the faculty role that I ended up getting. And then when I got there, I was like, oh no, this is actually like a weirdly good fit for me. So that said, I think there is, and I'm saying this as somebody who was very particular. I applied for 7 maybe faculty jobs, 7 or 8. So because I was already full-time employed, so I was not like, you know, even 100% convinced that was the route I wanted to go. But I do think there is a balance of, you know, really trying to be thoughtful about whether a job feels like it is a good fit. And particularly for ones that do seem like they could be a really good fit, like take the time to like tailor your materials and explain why. Because again, having been on the opposite end of the table now, I will say we throw away probably 80% of the applications we get sometimes because they're just, people don't take any time at all to tell us why we can't see the connection, right, between what we're asking for and what somebody who's applying, right, for the role has. And everybody has, you know, basic qualifications, but not always the more nuanced things that we're looking for. So take the time, I think, to tailor, but also don't, I think this connects to something that was a conversation having in the comments. Don't shut yourself out of roles just because they don't seem like they're tailor-made for you, because you cannot know, right? There's just that information is often not there. At the same time, I think something that I learned through the process is there's such an emphasis on really making sure that other people think you're a good fit, but it is a two-way street, right? You want that role to be a good fit for you. So really, this was advice I got from my advisor when I was going on the faculty job market. And I would also say applies to non-faculty positions, but really taking the time to sit down and think, like, what is my ideal? Even if you don't think that that's possible, right? What's your ideal? What would I be like happy with, even if it's not flawless? What am I willing to live with, maybe temporarily as a job, so I can get to something I'm happier with? And then what's a hard no for me? And really taking the time to kind of map those things out, regardless of the type of job you're looking for, I think is worthwhile because it does help you filter out potentially some jobs that are not appropriate, but also helps you be much more articulate when you're explaining why something is a good fit for you. In the role I have now, often we do have people who've been faculty who are applying for this type of role. And one of the things we're often most curious about is like, are you excited about this type of position? Like, what draws you to want to do this? And people who have a really compelling answer to that are generally going to be much higher up in our consideration list. So those are things that I think I feel like were not always as strongly communicated to me as the typical job market advice, which is much more in terms of how to sell yourself to potential employers, which is also important.
Well, thank you all. I think there were some great pieces of advice as you were sharing that I was noting down. Our next question is about kind of how you made the decision for what direction to go in. So what made you prefer a position in academia or industry? And you can kind of jump in any order that you'd like.
I'll be brave and go first on this one because I think it presents an illusion of choice. Sometimes it's not a preference, and sometimes there are realities. Sometimes you don't expect to be choosing industry or academia or a particular path within academia. Sometimes the realities of the academic job market mean that you might have to live somewhere where you are not safe or your family is not safe, and you have to consider those things. And so I think the preference thing, I don't know. I truly mean it when I say I loved being a professor and I love my current job. Out of transparency, I make vastly more money, like $40,000 more than I ever made as a professor in industry. So my quality of life is a lot better in that regard. So there are things you can prefer about both, but it's also it's possible to be very, very happy with both.
Well, I like to follow Kate, so I'll go next. I totally agree with Kate, which is that especially it's not about your preference sometimes. We all know why we love working in academia, but everybody knows that it's like how hard it is to work in academia in terms of the competition and in terms of the compensation. When you try to think about how much time and effort you have to invest in academia, but how little you can get back, it's really just reality. So for me specifically, money is one thing, of course. Another thing is in industry, especially after pandemic, there are tons of job out there. It's remote. My current job is remote, and a lot of jobs I applied for in the industry are remote. The bad thing about remote work is you can get up at 9 and log onto your computer, start working. No commute at all. You don't need to worry about what I'm wearing today. You see what I'm saying? So yeah, that two things really, I'm currently really enjoying like working remotely and that flexibility at home. Yeah.
I'll chime in a little bit, and I will echo. I think that having been in now like 3 roles that all involved research, 2 of which were more administrative, and then 1 faculty role, I do think that yes, sometimes it is not 100% a choice, right? But in terms of weighing the pros and the cons that I experienced, my first staff role, I found that I really loved doing applied research. I loved that I could collect data on something and then sit down and talk to somebody and say the data would suggest that we might want to change practice in this way. And they could do that. They could just do that, right? It wouldn't be like, then I submit it to a journal. Then 3 years later, maybe we get to talk about the implications of this with some people in a room and hope that 10 years later it will trickle into an actual teacher's classroom, right? But I could actually sit down and work with people who might be able to implement those changes. Of course, that also meant that I had to, like, there was a lot of humility that I had to learn because people would also turn around and go, that's a terrible idea for XYZ reasons that have nothing to do with your data and are about real life. And that was a great, I think, growth opportunity for me in terms of learning what it's like to, in my case, I'm particularly interested in college student learning. So what it's like to be a college educator within or outside of a classroom, right? And the realities of that and the different things that people have to balance, right? Things like, that sounds like a great practice. We're funded by donors. Donors want to see us do this other thing, right? Those are not things that I considered when I was just in a graduate program and reading articles and talking in theory about education. So I really liked that I could learn about sort of the concrete practice of education. What I ended up, the reason that I kind of decided to throw my hat in the ring for faculty roles, and I've kind of admitted that I wasn't super aggressive about that. I really liked my kind of administrative research position within student affairs assessment, but and was paid well and would have been happy to continue working in that role or higher level roles in that discipline. But I really wanted to have more autonomy over what types of research I did, right? What types of questions I asked. And that is, I think, sometimes the trade-off is that this varies by role, but in some kind of non-faculty roles, like essentially it's not as much like you have a research agenda, right? It's often more that there is a need. There are questions that people are asking. They need somebody to help answer those questions. You're going to help answer those questions. That's really nice for impact. But then the trade-off is at times you might be told that you need to answer a set of questions that are not the questions that you would have chosen, right? So I wanted to test out sort of faculty life and see if I really liked being able to have that autonomy over my research questions and my research agenda. And so I threw my hat in the ring. I ended up doing faculty work. I think with faculty work, I really liked that my job was variable. So I would spend some time teaching, I would spend some time doing research, I would spend some time on committees or participating in the design of teacher education, all of which felt really fulfilling to me. And I'm not somebody who likes to just do one thing all the time. So I like being able to like kind of do very different parts of my job. I liked engaging with students, graduate students in particular. I loved teaching graduate students, which is not something I necessarily expected, but that was really fun. And I loved my colleagues. I was in a department that was very supportive. It wasn't cutthroat or ultra competitive. It was still an R1, but it was like a very supportive R1 environment. And I really, really enjoyed that. And then at the end of the day, I think there were some kind of personal things that collided that made that position not super viable for me in terms of what my family did and my personal health. And so I really, whenever I was looking for positions, I was not hardcore looking for positions. So I just had my eye out for other opportunities and saw the position at MIT pop up. And this is why I say I think it's important to really think about what you want. Because for me, I knew that like, hey, if I found an administrative position that had the work-life balance that I had when I was in a staff role, like I have vacation days and I just take them, right? And I don't work, which was very hard for me. As a faculty member, you in theory could take vacation whenever, but in reality, then take it never, right? Anyway, not the best. But yeah, so it was like, okay, well, you know, if there's a chance to maybe regain some of that work-life balance, but have more autonomy over my sort of research questions and the types of work that I want to do, that would be the ideal balance. And when I interviewed for this position, just because I was curious, that's how they described it. And so then I decided to go for that, right? To kind of shift back out of the faculty role and into the one that I'm in now. So again, I think that for me, there is both pros and cons that I could attribute to faculty and non-faculty positions. I would call my position alt-ac rather than industry because I'm still within a university setting. But I think that I would also caution that the types of attributes you experience in either of those positions, you can find in different positions, right? So again, being really clear about what you want or what you like as you kind of experience the job market or work particular types of job, that's really helpful in my experience.
Okay. So 10 years ago, when I started applying for academic jobs, I was in love with teaching. There's nothing else I wanted to do with my entire life than teach college. And so it made sense. I will say though, 10 years ago, it didn't feel like there were any other options when you were getting a PhD, especially in educational psychology. There weren't all the industry options that there seem to be now. And certainly, I don't know if anybody else on the panel experienced this, but they definitely weren't selling it at the university level. None of my professors suggested it to me, or even if they did, they didn't have enough knowledge to help me apply for any of those jobs. So I went into academia. I loved it then. I still love it now. I will say, last summer I was industry curious, and I applied for some contract positions just to kind of explore, because you got summers off ish, and so I landed a contract at Edward Jones Financial Company as a senior clients insights analyst, and I loved it. It was a super awesome job, really cool culture, great team, fun place to work. It was a remote, so it has all those benefits as well. And then the contract ended, and I obviously went back to OU, and now I'm in administration. I really dig administration. I think the point I'm trying to make is I don't really have a preference. They can all be awesome. So industry, academic adjacent, academic, they're all can be great jobs, and they all can be awful jobs. So it depends on the culture, the people you work with, where your head's at the time, and where your life's at. And so I don't like saying that one's better than the other. That's completely false. So jobs are better for certain people at certain times in their lives, and they can all be satisfying and absolutely awesome, or the opposite.
Thank you all again for sharing a bit about kind of what was operating in your minds at the time when you're trying to go in certain directions, and also for being open about the context in which these job markets exist and the different priorities that individuals might have. Our next question is, how did you leverage your network when on the job market?
I don't want to go. Is everyone okay if I go first again? Okay. I used my network so much when I was making the leap to industry, far more than I ever did when I was on the academic job market. Thank you in particular to Ben Hetty for fielding my many text messages about how do I possibly search for job titles and stuff. But I had to rethink my network, because I tried asking people in academia, and a lot of them were very open and saying, I don't know what life is like outside of academia. I've never done anything like that. So I ended up tapping community contacts, taking every kind of referral. And I learned this really, really great question to ask every time I met someone new and I did an informational interview and asked them about their career and asked them how they did it. At the end of that meeting, I would say, who else should I know? And can you introduce me to them? And as an introvert, I hated it. I hated every second of it. And so I rewarded myself. I made like this little like social network diagram in my journal, like my bullet journal. And every time I met a new connection, I drew a new path and I gave myself a sticker, and I tried to see how far I could make the path. And I ended up meeting people 3 or 4 positions removed from the original contact. And I would always ask them, like, who else should I know? And can you introduce me to them? And how can I get there? And especially when you're making the leap out of academia, that proved to be incredibly helpful. So network, and continue to network.
I might have a little bit different experience, because I do not think network helped me in my job hunting experience. The only 2 times that maybe it's like networks was working is, number one, my own advisor offered me a postdoc position. So number 2, the fellowship at the University of Delaware, that professor I worked with, she almost offered me industry work in that specific educational game company, but it didn't end up well. It just didn't have that position anymore. That's the only 2 cases where network kind of helped me. Other than that, I tried a lot of things to build network. I mean, I think it's really hard for PhD students when you try to find an industry job and you find out that you have no relationship in the industry. Well, you might have relationships in academia, but that doesn't necessarily help you find a job in industry. What I did was I just start like message bombing people on LinkedIn. I didn't know anyone. I didn't even have a LinkedIn back that time. So I started LinkedIn and use a 3 months free premium to start it to message strangers, literally strangers. Some people will get back to you with some, information about the position you're interested in. That part is helpful, but I don't think anyone like networking that way will help you eventually get a job. So that was my experience.
Yeah, so I guess I'll chime in a little bit, and I'll say I wasn't sure exactly how to answer this question. So I think, networks can function a couple of ways. One is the sort of very explicit networking we think about, where somebody knows about an opportunity or something, so they let us know, or they get us an inside scoop. I think there's also a lot of implicit functioning for networks where when I think of my faculty role, for example, it's not something I necessarily think I got through networking. There was a position, I applied for it through the traditional channels, right? I was invited to interview. On the other hand, like it probably didn't hurt that my advisor were people whose names you would recognize within the discipline, right? And that there were a lot of people at Iowa State who studied higher education, and a lot of the people I worked with at Iowa State were very well-known higher education professors. So even though I wouldn't think of them as my EdPsych network, that probably helped in terms of like the chair of the search committee definitely knew who these people were. There's a good chance that he would have spoken to them, right, unofficially to like see if this was somebody who was worth inviting in. That type of thing happens pretty commonly, I think, in academic positions, and you may not even realize, right? So I think it's important to note that like your network is it's a series of relationships that you have, right? And those relationships can function to help you obtain jobs or be successful in both implicit and explicit ways. And so I think for me, I can't think of a ton of sort of explicit networking I did in relation to getting a job. Same with my current position. There was a posting and I applied for it, and there was really no overlap between the people who I work with now and then my prior positions. But at the same time, it was helpful that like the people I had worked with in an administrative position previously were willing to serve as references, right? So they could say, yeah, this person's been a faculty member, but they also know what it's like to like sort of work within the machine of a university, that type of thing. The one thing I will say was maybe an example of clear networking is that my first role I actually got became aware of it because I happened to be connecting. Like I knew I was interested in exploring positions that were not strictly tenure track faculty positions, that were more sort of alternative academic positions. I wanted to stay within a university, but maybe shift to a more administrative role. I was curious about that. I was full-time enrolled in grad school. I was funded. I didn't need a full-time position, but wanted to explore that. And so I was just building inroads with the office that I ended up working in, not with any kind of intentionality, right? Just with, I want to know about what you do. Can I talk about your work? Oh, you have this project, like, can I help out with this project? So somebody teaches this class, maybe I'll take this class. And it was through those like genuine relationships, right, that somebody said, hey, I think we're going to have a role open up. And if you're interested, you should apply. And so I applied and I went through the same channel as everybody else, but I would imagine it doesn't hurt, right, that I had these existing relationships with people. So that I think is another example of networking functioning in terms of when you have these kind of existing relationships, A, you're aware of opportunities, but B, you often have this kind of inside scoop on whether those opportunities are going to be a good fit for you. But generally, the way I think of networking is more about this sort of developing of sort of genuine relationships with people over time, not so much in terms of, I haven't done it so much in terms of like, I'm trying to get a job and so I'm building this network, but more like I am fostering this network of relationships and mentorships and, you know, people being able to help me out and me being able to help them out, and kind of trying to maintain that across my career, so that, you know, when opportunities do exist, I am aware of them, right? And I think that that's sort of how I think of it as a more as a long-term, I guess, approach to networking.
Yeah, and just to build on that, for academic networking, conferences. So AERA and APA, generally the biggest ones for our field, but then small conferences as well. So AERA is in April. Generally in April, you can talk to people and learn that there's going to be some jobs coming out next year. They will know by then a lot of the time, because when somebody leaves, they leave in April or May, and then you don't immediately get to hire someone the next year. It actually usually takes about a year till you get that line back, and then they can hire someone. So they know for about a full year that they're going to be able to hire someone. Most of the time, by the way, anything can happen, but this is usually the case. And you can learn about those in April before the job's even posted in the summer. And then APA in August, jobs are starting to roll out. This is your opportunity to meet people where the jobs have rolled out. For example, I'm at the University of Oklahoma. I saw this job come out, and then I networked with Dr. Ji Hong and Dr. Megan Hennessy. Ji Hong used to be my colleague. She's at Arizona now, but Meg Hennessy is still here. And I remember I was like sitting there waiting to talk to them for like 30 minutes as they were having other conversations. I was like, excuse me, I heard you have a job. I'm interested. And they pretended to care what I had to say, but then it ended up working out. So those align pretty well with the job market. At those conferences, there's two things I recommend going to the most, and it's not the research sessions. Those are great if you want to learn about stuff. Cool, you should go to those. That's the point of a conference. But for networking, socials, go to the first day social or whatever, and go to socials that directly follow business meetings. So go to the socials. Number two, go to the business meeting. Anybody who's in that, or most people who are in that field are going to be at the business meeting. And it's a great place to meet people. There's usually like a beverage or snack time before the business meeting starts. You learn about the field. And then there's usually a cocktail hour afterwards. You can talk to people and network. So those are great for that. And then I recommend a small conference here and there if you can. And I know it gets really expensive, and I didn't have any money to go to all these conferences either. But the nice thing about small conferences is with ARA, there's 10 to 15,000 people in one spot, and it's crazy overwhelming. At a conference like SciPy or NCIC, there's like 100 to 200 maybe. And it's more one-on-one. For example, SciPy, the Scholarly Consortium for Innovative Psychology and Education, it is 50-50 faculty to students, and about 100 to 120 people go to it. And you can't help but to network, because otherwise you're sitting in the corner. You're like forced to network, and it's great to meet folks. In fact, the SciPy before I was on the job market was at the University of Oklahoma. So it's cool how it can come full circle. The next one, about 12 years later, is also going to be at the University of Oklahoma. So that's pretty neat. But conferences. If you can go, I know it's hard. If you can only go to one, pick one and try to go to ARA or APA, just because you'll meet more folks. But yeah, and then one last thing I did is I had my advisor, anytime I applied for a job, I was like, do you know anyone there? Can you shoot an email, like telling them secretly that you think I'm cool or something? And then only half the time she did, but she was fine. Like, hey, I got the student Ben Head, he's applying. He's cool. You should interview him. And that might have gotten me, a couple follow-up Zoom interviews or whatnot.
Well, thank you all again. Those were not only some great stories about how you leveraged your own networks and made that work, but also some nice pieces of advice for kind of doing that currently for positions we might be interested in for the future. Our next question would be, are there any specific resources or materials that you would suggest having prepared in advance? And who or where did you go to for support during the process of prepping those resources or materials?
I'll jump in first on this one, if that's all right. So two things. Number one, your CV/resume. Your CV for academic jobs must be perfect. I've been on a bunch of search committees, and I will say often there's 100 candidates and they might only look at your CV in the first round of moving people through to the next round, which again is unfair and not cool, but it's very common. So make it perfect. They're looking for literally any reason to take you out of the pool, any reason at all, because they have so many people. And if there's a couple typos, they might be like, not careful enough, sorry, and not look any further. So make it perfect, comb through it, have your advisor comb through it, give it to your classmates, have them comb through it and make it perfect. I'll let people with more expertise than me talk about resumes, but they look a lot different. When I was applying to contract industry jobs, that was probably my biggest struggle, was turning my CV into a resume. And here's my hint, pro tip, don't start from scratch and create a resume, and get some advice and help from somebody in industry. Looks completely different. They don't care at all about your publications. They might in the interview, believe it or not, but not on your resume. And then the other thing I would say to have prepared in advance is your job talk. Don't wait until you get an interview to try to make your job talk. Create it. It doesn't hurt anything to create it in advance, and then practice it. I practiced it twice in front of my entire college. So I invited everyone in the College of Education to come watch my job talk. I got feedback and then I did it again. And so when I showed up to interviews, I had ran through that thing like 50 times and like 4 or 5 times in front of groups of people, and it was hitting on all cylinders.
So Ben mentioned the resume, and he speaks the truth when he says it was painful. I had a really long, beastly, impressive CV, and I had to figure out how to fit it down into 2 pages, which for my career status, I'd been in academia for 10 years and was told that a 2-page resume was okay, but depending on where you are, a 1 page might be okay. The most helpful thing I did for a resume, in addition to Googling, how do I convert a CV to a resume, was I, for several semesters at the small liberal arts college where I was, had invited the Career Center staff to come into my class and help my students work on resumes. And so I immediately had that contact and reached out to them. And I was like, hey, I know you guys usually work with undergrads, but what do you think about this? And they were delighted to help me. I'm happy to share, I had 2 versions of my resumes, one for research and evaluation type jobs and another for kind of like a catch-all modification type job. I'm happy to share that with any of you if you email me. I will put my email in the chat. I did tailor my resume slightly, but I spent a lot of time making sure that it quantified things. It's like that I taught 1,000 students, that I had, I put number of publications on there because they didn't really care what it was in. They cared that I took X number of projects from idea to finish, showed that I was ridiculously persistent. And I did have a section for publications, but the ones I highlighted, and this broke my heart a little bit, was not the journals that I was like so proud to have published in. They didn't care about that. It was ones that represented that I could work collaboratively with people in engineering and other disciplines. So it wasn't like my top publications. It was ones that I strategically highlighted for certain reasons. And I put a link to my Google Scholar. But I spent a lot of time on my resume to make sure that I was highlighting my qualifications on that. It started out as a painful process making a resume, and actually at the end I was like, this is kind of fun. Look at all the stuff I've accomplished. A while ago in academia, there used to be this narrative of like, you can't do anything else. Like you're in the ivory tower and you only know how to be an academic. And now we have so many transferable skills, truly transferable skills that are highly desired. So eventually I embraced the resume process, but I took it extremely seriously and had multiple people look at my resume.
I will say, just to make things a little extra confusing, that if you're looking at alt-ac positions, like alternative academia, like within universities, but not a faculty role, it's a coin toss whether they're going to want a resume or a full CV. So, and they may or may not tell you, because why make things transparent when you could just make them really opaque? So I am teasing a little bit here, but I will say that, for my first kind of alt-ac position, I submitted a resume. That is what they wanted. They were happy with that. And it was like entry level. So I submitted like a 1-page resume. And then for my current position, I worked really hard to get my CV down to a couple of pages. And they emailed me and they were like, great, can we please see your full CV? Like we would like to see the whole shebang, right? So regardless of what you're applying for, maybe keep updated versions of both. I keep a CV that I still have that I have not updated recently, but should do so, explaining the types of research that I do and so forth. So that is something I think is worth noting. You can maybe ask ahead of time, but it also doesn't hurt to say, I think I had a version of my resume that had at the bottom like a full CV is available upon request, right? So they knew that I had that and I could send that to them and it was available. So when we interviewed people for a couple of positions we've hired subsequently, I think most people submitted a CV. So it's kind of a toss-up. You could probably guess based on, the position I have now, most people have a PhD. So we're used to reading CVs. The one I had previously, that wasn't necessarily the case. So you might err toward resumes outside of the university. Probably a resume is what you're going for, I would guess. I'm not sure about in some of the more research-oriented positions that might be different. So yeah, I think that is something I just wanted to mention to folks. And in terms of what else to prepare, I think it could be really difficult to say for non-faculty positions, what else to prepare. I would say that this is maybe a more holistic answer as opposed to a concrete one. But again, I think the idea of really being able to articulate why you're a uniquely good fit for this position, like what aspects of your experience matter. In academia, sometimes we get so used to talking about our value in terms of how many publications and how fancy is the journal, and just those markers, right, that we think of as indicators of success or quality, and those are definitely important if you're applying for faculty positions. And I think something Kate mentioned kind of connects to this. That's not necessarily what people really care about when they're talking about non-faculty positions. So in my current role, we really wanted people who could talk about, because we're in sort of the faculty development sphere, we help people, instructors learn to teach more effectively. And then on the research end of things, right, I kind of conduct research and evaluation studies to help people improve practices across the university. So I had to really explain how my work was collaborative, how I could collaborate with STEM educators in particular, and explain teaching concepts to engineers who may or may not have heard about a lot of those teaching concepts. A lot of describing how to be collaborative, a lot of discussing sort of the output of my work in much more applied terms. So yeah, I think it's depending on the role, they may care about different things. There are some roles, I didn't apply for these, but some roles where they really, really, really care about your grant experience. So they're going to want you to talk about that mostly, right? Again, the listing hopefully is your guide if you need more background information. And I'm sorry if you're hearing my 3-year-old yell at me. He's going to bedtime. He's not enthusiastic about that right now. But yeah, depending on, I think, the role, hopefully you can get your clues from the job listing. You can always reach out for more information, but I would say that knowing yourself how to articulate what sort of unique experiences you have is going to be valuable. Um, there's one position I just saw recently at MIT where they're looking for somebody who has K-12 science teaching experience, right? In addition to educational research experience and instructional design experience, right? Like if you can bring in those multiple experiences, those things matter, right? In addition to the sort of traditional markers of academic quality that we think about. So really thinking about those types of things and how they might make you a good fit is, I think, time well spent, and then being able to articulate that very succinctly and clearly and concretely in your cover letter and in your resume. I think those are both really important pieces of information. So.
Yeah, since everybody's talking about like resume and everything. So one thing I did, I kind of prepared these resources for myself and by myself, which is a spreadsheet that I keep track of. That spreadsheet includes, well, since I'm a data scientist, I just like to use spreadsheet to track everything. So that include the job title, the job description, requirements, responsibility, and when you start apply for it, what result you got, and also, of course, a lot of highlightings or your comments about the job. And this spreadsheet, well, number one, I use this spreadsheet to keep track of my applications. And number two, once you started to have more and more job, like keep track in the spreadsheet, you will find a lot of similarities in there. So that will help you prepare your resume more efficiently. However, I do want to point out that if you look at the like 20, let's say 20 job posting or descriptions, you will see that although there are similarities, there are definitely something specific about one specific position. And that is, I believe, I still believe that is what the interviewers or the HR is looking for. So make sure you have those highlighted in your resume once you found them in the spreadsheet, like looking at your data. And I think that is the most helpful thing, like the helpful resources I used in my entire application. Yeah.
Well, for our next question, I think we've covered some elements of this, but I still want to ask it in case there's anything to add. So the question is, what are some important differences between applications for academic and industry jobs that graduate students should keep in mind? For instance, how might deliverables and timelines differ across these job markets?
I'm going to interpret this as like differences in terms of doing the job or in terms of applying for the job. Can I clarify that
Yeah, I have
quickly?
the same question.
So this would be in terms of applying for the job.
Oh, okay. In terms of applying for the job, what are some important differences to kind of keep in mind? I think I've mentioned a few of these. So one thing in terms of applying for jobs is to be aware that, I mean, even within faculty roles, there's a wide variety of different types of faculty roles, right? Like there are ones that are very teaching oriented, and there are ones that are very research oriented, and there are ones that are kind of a mix of both, or maybe they're not sure, that it could actually be a little bit confusing. And outside of faculty positions, there's also a wide variety of positions. And so I think the thing to keep in mind, and this actually makes all of what we're talking about difficult, is that there are these really different positions, and what you need to prepare to really be compelling for each of those is a little bit different, right? And so I think that maybe that's something where having networks is really helpful, because there are, and I know Kate and Ben have both spoken to this, there are people who can help you kind of like parse through what's out there and think about like what you would need to prepare that people actually want to look at, right? And I think that's something to keep in mind. We do have a little more of a formula for applying for faculty positions. There's no formula for non-faculty positions. Like they might want a CV, or they might want a resume, and they might want a cover letter, or they may or may not really read your cover letter, or they might want they might want you to attach some articles you've written. I believe for my current position, they may not care at all about articles that you have written. And so that can make it a little bit extra challenging. One thing that I think is very common is that outside of faculty roles where you're applying so far ahead of time, right? I think most of the even alt-ac positions are usually looking for people to start sooner rather than later. Now, it doesn't mean that they won't work with you. So if you are locked into, like I said, we've hired people recently who were teaching, like had just started to teach, right? Usually this is because our hiring cycle is not timed the best, right? So we would offer somebody a position 1 week into the semester. You know, if that person is teaching, we're going to wait until the end of the semester, right, to ask them to actually start that position. We're not going to say you have to leave your teaching position mid-semester and burn every professional bridge you've ever had. We would not do that, right? I don't know, and maybe in some industry positions that would be the expectation. But but the timeline in general does tend to be faster. You're less likely to be applying for a position in the fall that you would start like after you graduate in the spring, right? If you see a position in the fall, they probably want you to start at the very least at the end of the fall semester, right? So probably in December. That you can ask for flexibility. You can ask to start remotely if you're not ready to move yet. All sorts of other things that you can try to negotiate, but just being aware that those timelines tend to be a lot faster outside of academic roles. That is also true, I think, of actually doing the job, but that's a whole other topic in terms of the timeline of deliverables when you're in the position.
So I'm actually gonna adjust course a teeny bit here. We somehow all the time flew by and we're getting close to the end of our time together. So I do want to make sure that we get to ask questions from the audience. So I'm going to jump ahead to those, and then if we have time, we can come back to the other prepared questions. So the first question from an audience member was, as an early career scholar in educational psychology, PhD in educational studies at Ohio State, how do you navigate applying for either education or psychology jobs? Is there a disadvantage applying for jobs in psychology departments? And that question has been pasted into the chat as well.
So I think Kate had a good response in the chat. You can apply to both. I will say that there's a little caveat to that. So it depends on what your degree actually says. So if your degree says learning sciences, or if your degree says mine was urban education. Now I had a concentration in ed psych, but it didn't matter. That immediately counted me out for a lot of psychology positions, because for APA accreditation, a certain amount of folks in a psychology program must have a psychology degree. So that does matter. Now, that doesn't count you out. I would email the search chair and ask them and just say, hey, I have a non-psychology degree. Can I still apply? If your degree is educational psychology, that's psychology. So that does count if it says psychology on your degree. And then a lot of times they'll list it in the job call. They will list only psych degrees apply. And if they don't, go for it.
All right, I'm gonna move us on to the other audience question, which would be about the sites that you use to find both academic and alt-ac or industry positions.
Yeah, Ben mentioned LinkedIn, which is abysmal but necessary. You don't have to post on it, but I did find it really helpful to search on it. I thought one of the hardest parts of finding industry positions was knowing what to search for. And I feel like I might have found my current role just by searching the word curriculum, because it was loosely affiliated with EdPsych. Idealist.org is really great for jobs. They have like a remote full-time filter. And then I'll share this in the chat, but the my division at the Aspen Institute is currently hiring for things. And so that is a lovely place to look for jobs. But really just asking people what's out there. it's not as clean often to look for industry positions as it is with, academic. You go to the Chronicle and you search for assistant professors.
Yeah, so I will say there are some sites for all ACT positions that are pretty common. You will see them posted occasionally through the same avenues that you would see faculty positions. So Chronicle, the job search there has a ton of all ACT positions that you can see. You can find sort of alternative academic positions through sometimes even like APA Division 15, through sometimes the ARA job board, even though it is painful to filter on that one. Higheredjobs.com is a really commonly used website. So that one you can find a decent number of alternative academic positions. You just are searching under administrative positions rather than faculty positions. And again, one thing I'll say for any of those sites, but I used Higher Ed Jobs a lot, was that you might want to be broad in terms of the kind of there are categories you can filter by. You might want to check some categories that you may not explicitly think of yourself as working within, because people kind of stick jobs wherever sometimes on those web pages. So, like my position sometimes will be under assessment and evaluation and like compliance, and then sometimes it's under institutional research, and sometimes it's under faculty development. So I think, search broadly to see what types of positions might be available. The other thing I'll point out is that for kind of various administrative roles within the university or alternative academic roles, there are often professional networks, just like there are for kind of academic research roles. So for faculty development, it would be the POD network, POD network. And so they have a conference every year. They have a website with a job board. There's a listserv you can sign up for, and then you can get listings for jobs in faculty development. People do postdocs that are faculty development oriented. You can go to the conference and they actually interview people at the conference. So you can get positions that way. And then, for student affairs, for example, there's student affairs conferences, ACPA, NASPA. Those are their own animals. If you've never been to one, connect with somebody who has, so you know how to navigate them. But I think that there's sort of a process to becoming part of a discipline or a field for a lot of alternative academic positions that you can also explore, right? And many of them have their own conferences and listservs and networks and that type of thing. You do not have to be in those networks to break into those fields. They're often open to people. I had nothing to do with Pod Network before I got my current position, but now that I'm in it, that's somewhere that I go and I present and I talk to people. So I'm just being aware that there are those networks that sort of exist for alternative academic positions too is really helpful, because a lot of people find their jobs essentially the same way you do for academic ones, which is through networks or listservs or knowing people who know that a position is opening up somewhere and so forth.
One thing I'll add is it's hard to know what to search for when you enter in job titles into Idealist or Indeed, or if you set in LinkedIn reminders. And we are educational psychology, learning sciences, education in general are really qualified for a lot of different positions that nobody tells us about. And so I'm just going to name a list of positions I'd recommend putting into Indeed and searching for. Behavioral scientist, research strategist, learning program manager or director, UX researcher, client consumer insights analyst, applied statistical analyst, market research, learning specialist, research scientist, social scientist. These are all names of jobs that don't have learning scientist or educational psychologist in the title, or often in the job call, they don't list our degree, but our skills map on absolutely perfect onto these careers. So when you're searching jobs, search all these ones, including things I didn't even mention, like instructional designer. There's a whole bunch of different options. I didn't even mention anything about academic adjacent jobs. There's a whole nother list of job titles. And then the last thing I'll say is think beyond tech. Everybody wants to go into tech. Tech's weird, and they're all it's all about making money for their people who own their stocks. They're investors, so they just hire people and lay them off in a constant cycle. So think beyond tech. By the way, tech can be great jobs. Apply to them. If you get it, go do it, make a bunch of money for a little bit. But think beyond tech. Think about the financial industry. Think about medical education. Think about the health industry. These are all going to be markets that are a little more solid and don't ebb and flow as much with the economy.
So I might still have a very different strategy in this. I didn't go to like one specific job listing platform or like a subscription. Again, I had one subscription called Higher Ed something. I couldn't even remember the name just because that's a sign. I never use it actually, although I got the emails every week. For me, the only resources or the websites I used were all like official websites from companies and universities. That's how I get all my information. I just like the university I'm interested in, or the professor I'm interested in, or the company I'm interested in. I just go to their official websites and select careers and see if there are any job opening there. Yep.
Okay, we are going to wrap up in about 6 minutes. So I think we have time for maybe one final question. And that would be, how did you manage the stress and uncertainty of navigating the job market? And is there any advice that you might give, or anything you would do differently that you'd like to share with this group today?
Yeah, so every time I've been on the market, whether like academic, like searching for jobs in academia or industry, I just cried a lot basically, and had trusted people that I could go to and just say, this is brutal. I'd rather get a rejection than just be ghosted. This is so random. And I just made myself a little sticker chart, and every application I got submitted, give myself a little sticker. Every time I got further in the process, I give myself a little sticker, but have a trusted sounding board you can go to beyond just getting advice on your resume and your application and your job talk. Yes, good old behaviorism, positive reinforcement. Absolutely.
Yep, I agree. Cry does it definitely helps. But also, I do want you all to keep in mind that luck plays a very, very important role in this entire process. If you get a rejection, if you didn't get what you want, remember, like 80% of chance it's luck. It has nothing to do with your ability, it has nothing to do with your experience. I really couldn't emphasize this more. I can share like my personal experience to show you how luck is important for me, at least for me, to get my current job. So I'll just be honest that I didn't get offered the first time. I was on a wait list. I was not even told I was on a wait list. They just tell me, no, we're passing on. We have another better candidate. However, I think it's like 2 weeks later, they reach out to me again saying, hey, are you still interested? So it turned out that candidate they offered the job, she turned down the offer. So I'm next. So really, it's really just luck, pure luck. So And also for all your information, I applied for that job in February. I did not get my first interview until May. So never lose hope, and just remember there's a lot of luck playing around. Yeah, just hang in there, and good luck to you all.
So with managing stress, I would say maintain your relationships and your hobbies. They're so important through this whole process. Don't lose yourself to any career or the job market. Of course, you need a job and you need to focus on that, but maintain those things because they matter and they're part of your identity. And then remember, this is something I tell all my students, jobs serve a purpose. They're to help you pay your bills, and hopefully they're meaningful. That's great. But at the end of the day, you got to pay your bills. And that's the whole point of a job. If you can find one you like, awesome. But sometimes in between finding one you like or love, you work a couple that you don't so much. So keep that in mind, academic or not. It's a means to an end.
Yeah, I'll say, again, my position was really different because every time I've been job searching, I already had a job. And so I was not in a position where if I didn't get it, if I didn't get a faculty role, I was just going to keep doing administrative research, which I was happy to do, right? And that is not going to be the position everybody's in. But I will say that one thing I often recommend to folks is to really just sit down and think, if I don't get this, what would I be willing to do? So again, kind of having that list, like I literally sat down like a big nerd and wrote it down in a journal, handwritten for me, because that helps me think, right? And was like, what is my ideal? What would I be very happy to do, right? What am I willing to do for a while? To go to Ben's point about a job is a job. And sometimes I'm doing this for a while to get this experience so then I can go do the thing I'm happy to do. And what is a hard no, right? And just having that list in front of me when I'm sending applications, when I'm doing interviews, like that is very helpful because it really drives home this idea of like, you're not desperate. You're not just trying to get anything. You have preferences, you have needs, right? You can ask questions about those types of things when you're in the job interview, which actually I think people want to know that you're really interested in this position. You're not just trying to get any old position, right? You can really think strategically about what are you good at? What do you enjoy doing, right? I think this is a little more woo, right? We've gotten some like good, hard behavioral advice, and then my advice is like spend some time really like being introspective and thinking about yourself and what you're good at and what you like and what you want and what you don't want. And shape your job search through that, right? And that's not to say that you will like manifest yourself the perfect job because that's not how that works. But you will, I think, by really spending time thinking about yourself and what you want and all of those types of things, I think you will end up with something that is a better fit. And it feels a lot more empowering to be in the job market when you're trying to be strategic and thoughtful about yourself. And remembering, again, it's a two-way street. It's not just about you trying to convince them to hire you. It's also about you trying to find a position that you want, that you're going to be happy to do, especially if you're like going to move across the country, right, to do this job. So you're worth something and you're good at stuff, right? So I think keeping that in mind and really, if you can't keep that in mind, then ask your people, right, your friends or family, whoever that is for you, to remind you periodically that you're good at stuff and you're worth something. I think that can be really helpful in terms of kind of just maintaining that energy. And I also do think that it makes you more confident and compelling when you're walking into job interviews, right? You're not frightened by them because you know that you're offering them something that's valuable, and you're also there to see if their position is worth your time. And I think that's like a really useful attitude to have, even if you don't like 100% feel it. The other thing that I'll say, and this is, I think to go back to a prior point, I feel like I've gotten a little heat for this before, but now it's a little more widely accepted. I say, especially on the faculty job market, and this is also true of some alternative academic or industry positions. Something I mentioned, you can't always know what they're looking for, right? And then there are so many people out there. And so, don't count yourself out of positions, but also don't get married to a position based on a job posting. The job posting is not, you may or may not have a clear idea of what that job is about based on the job posting. There were jobs where I was like, this is perfect. And I threw in my application and then it was crickets. And I never heard from those people, right? Until 8 months later, I got a form letter that was like, nope, not you. And I have applied for, like I said, my faculty position that I ended up getting was a great fit. And I didn't see that at all, right? I just was like, well, this seems fine. I guess I'll throw my hat in the ring, right? And so it's really hard to know what's happening behind the scenes. And I think that it means both throw your hat in the ring if you're not sure, but also don't get married to any type of position. There's no dream job that you're going to be able to tell from the job posting itself. So for me, the mentality that really helps when you're in the application stage is you submit the application, you put the work to tailor it, to make it good, submit it, and then just forget about it. It doesn't even exist. It never happened. Don't think about it. Don't, to the best of your ability, like do a bunch of research on what it would be like to live in this place for this position that you have no idea if you'll even get called for, right? I know that's really hard to do realistically, but I think that's the mentality that makes it the easiest, is to just say, I threw my hat in the ring and now I'm going to pretend that never happened. And then if I get a call, I'll be like pleasantly surprised about that. So, and then you can just keep moving on.
All right, well, as we wrap up, I want to first plug the next Motivation Monday before I forget, which is happening on February 26th. And the topic will be Beyond Boundaries, Empowering Research Through Multicultural and Critical Lenses. And then lastly, I want to thank our panelists tonight. This was a really insightful and enriching conversation. I took a bunch of notes. I think that I feel very privileged to have participated in this Motivation Monday, and I learned so much. And so thank you to our panelists for giving of your time and sharing about your experiences so openly. And thank you to all of the graduate students that joined today's Motivation Monday. We hope to see you again soon. Thank you, everyone, and have a good evening.